It's nice to be here. I am Olutayo Adesina. I teach history at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. My special focus within the historical discipline is actually the history of development, as well as the economic history of West Africa. Much more recently, people have been agitated as to the continued importance of history in the scheme of. But we tell people that history is actually not all about the rise and fall of empires or the death of one king and the ascension of another. Rather, it is much more now about the totality of human experience. You want to speak about development, you want to speak about architectural issues, you want to speak about religion, human terms, all sorts of things that you find within the human community is what history deals with. And so now you have diverse subspecialties in history. You have military history, you have social history, you have women's history and gender, you have diplomatic, you have economic and social history. And so it's no longer about the rise and fall of empires. Rather, it's about understanding how man within society has used resources to actually help society to make sense of the trajectories of human growth and development.
Thank you so much, Professor Adesina. Let's take it from the basis. Can you give us a background of development? When people say development, what are they actually referring to? And of course, within the context of Africa and West Africa and Nigeria.
In contemporary times, development has been seen from the prism of Western definition of development, which talks about GDP, GMP, industrialization, growth. But these parameters might not be true of all societies and of all peoples. If you have read the work of Amartya Sen, the Indian economist, you will see him describing development as people rather than things. Now we talk more about infrastructure, roads, housing, etc. But it's much more about people. How well have we gone on to make better humans out of the people that we have in. So when you build bridges, you construct houses, and you don't build the people, then of course we are the poorer for it. So within the Western construct, development has to do with much more about economic growth, the GDP, the industries, industrialization. But that is different from the African construct of development, even though you have what you call the dominant analysis. The dominant analysis has come about because there are gatekeepers. And it is these gatekeepers who determine the direction of thought. And so, but for Africans, it's the emphasis, just like the Indian economist I mentioned earlier said, the emphasis here is more on people. When you develop the people, and when people are happy, they are much more developed than people who live in high-rise buildings, who eat 3 times a day, but are not that happy. So the construct of development in Africa, or in West Africa more specifically, is about that sense of community, support systems that have gone on to shape human society. Although, unfortunately, the African system has also now succumbed to the Western paradigm, which has also created a kind of distortion afflicting West Africa now. And that's why we now have problems of poverty, problems of suicides, problems of lack of jobs. These were issues that society could deal with very well in the past, because from the traditional systems, we had created support systems that didn't give room for vagrancy, that didn't give room for poverty, that didn't give room for loneliness. These were things that created certain substructures that gave rise to superstructures in African society that ultimately led to the development of what you call that sense of community. Unfortunately, that sense of community is atrophying now, because now families and friends are becoming used to individualism. Individualism is not an African concept. You only get that from the Western.
That is very important. And like you said before, it is important to study history. And history is not just date and figures. Help us to understand where we are coming from. Help us to understand everything, our position in the world, how we get to where we are today. So it is very strange, in fact, that Nigeria at the point had to remove history from the curriculum. I don't know how they managed to convince the people. Anyway, as a historian, as a lecturer of history, what did you see as a conviction as to why that was even accepted to start with? I know this is a digression, but it helped because it's so important from my understanding of history. So, what happened there?
Well, there had been several attempts to remove history from the curriculum, because here, history was seen as one of the useless disciplines. History, sociology, anthropology. I've already told you about the dominant ideology, the dominant analysis of seeing society within the prism of industrialization. So any society that does not move in the direction of science and industry is not a modern society, so to speak. And so our governments bought into that idea. And the first attempt to remove history physically from the curriculum actually began around 1982 under the administration of Alhaji Shehu Shagari. But that decision fell through that time. And it was not until 1987 that a new attempt was made under the regime of General Ibrahim Babangida. That was the period when we were trying to introduce intro tech, science and tech into the curriculum. And so people began to buy into the idea of removing history because, well, is it not about the rise and fall of empires? Historians themselves did not help matters because the way they used to take emphasis on dates and obscure names actually gave fillip to that decision. And so when it was removed around 1987, and it was replaced with social studies, for people, that made sense because social studies was easily identifiable with what was going on in society. It was softer. It was less cumbersome than history. History that you had to remember so many dates, so many names, so many places. So society itself welcomed the introduction of social studies. But as they have now discovered, social studies is not the same thing as history. The emphasis on the dates in history actually obviated the didactic nature of that discipline. What can you learn from the past? That's the emphasis. But the teachers of law actually miss the point by ensuring that they laid emphasis on both the dates, the important people in society. History will have to take on board people who actually were also at the grassroots level, the building blocks of society. And so because of this, people did not identify with that discipline because as far as they were concerned, it was obscure.